President Trump will meet with high school students and teachers Wednesday following last week's deadly shooting. The White House says Mr. Trump will also hold an event Thursday with state and local officials to discuss school safety.
This comes as the president faces backlash over a tweet he sent this weekend about the shooting. He wrote, "Very sad that the FBI missed all of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion." Errol Barnett is traveling with the president in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Online, President Trump appeared to be attacking everyone but Russia over the weekend, which the special counsel has accused of waging information warfare against the United States. But it was Mr. Trump's comments about the FBI and the school shooting here in South Florida that attracted most people's attention.
The reality of it is that they are two separate issues.
The president should be staying out of law enforcement business.
Republicans responded to President Trump's criticism of the FBI after he seemed to link the Parkland shooting with the Russia probe. In a flurry of tweets, the president criticized Democrats for using Russia as an election excuse. He called claims of campaign collusion a hoax and said that the Russia investigations were creating chaos in the U.S.
Russia's clearly tried to advance their agenda into the United States.
The president's outburst followed special counsel Robert Mueller's indictment Friday against 13 Russians for using social media to disrupt the U.S. election.
As you can see with the FBI indictment, the evidence is now really incontrovertible.
The president's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, applauded Mueller's efforts. But President Trump shot back at his aide online, saying, quote, "General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians." Now, we should be clear, Mueller's charges made no judgment on whether Russian interference swung the election. But it did note that Russia's efforts were designed to bolster Mr. Trump's candidacy. Vlad Namery.
All right, Errol Barnett, thank you very much. Let's bring in CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reid. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
So let's start with this latest round of indictments. 13 Russians implicated. What are they charged for, and why is this development so important to the overall investigation?
Well, it's significant because this legal document sets out in specific detail how the Russians meddled in the 2016 election. Because when you say meddled in something, right, I'm planning a wedding right now. There's plenty of people meddling, let me tell you,
Right.
and they're not committing any crimes. But here, Robert Mueller lays out how they went about it, pushing out these messages on social media, buying political ads with fraudulent, stolen IDs and information, and even in some cases staging a rally, two rallies on opposite sides of an issue in the same city on the same day. The legal significance here is really that it just lays out what happened, because let me tell you, none of these Russians who have been charged, they're not going to be arrested and extradited. That's not going to happen. So unlike with Manafort and with Gates and Papadopoulos, where we had an indictment and then someone was in court within 24 hours, none of these Russians are going to see the inside of a U.S. courtroom.
Right, but it just confirms what we've been suspecting, what the intelligence community has been saying has happened. Now we know how it happened. Speaking of Manafort, though, Special Counsel Robert Mueller saying the Special Counsel has uncovered additional criminal conduct against him, and so does that mean more charges, maybe? They're
really turning up the heat on Paul Manafort. This was revealed late Friday night in a court document, sort of as an aside, like, well, we have uncovered this additional criminal evidence. We could charge him with bank fraud. Manafort's already facing a dozen charges, dozens of years in prison if he is convicted on all of these charges. So they're turning up the heat to hopefully flip him, right? If his associate, Rick Gates, provides information about him, that makes it even more likely that he's going to be convicted on at least some of these charges. So what they're trying to do is convince him that he should provide information about people even more important than him to special counsel in exchange for dropping some of these charges. But there is still the possibility of a pardon hanging out there for Manafort. So for him and his attorneys, they just have to look at the weight of the evidence, more charges versus trying to push through it and hope for a pardon.
Right. You know, one of the things I found really fascinating in reading the indictment when it comes to those 13 individuals who were indicted is that they also specifically targeted African Americans. Like they targeted, what they were trying to do was stir up racial divisions in this country. There's an interesting piece in the New Yorker, and I'm just going to quote it here, and it's titled "The Power of News Illiteracy. At the heart of the Russian fraud is an essential, embarrassing insight into American life. Large numbers of Americans are ill-equipped to see and to assess the credibility of the things they read." They're not able, we as a society are not able to assess the things that we read with a critical eye. And the understanding is that they use racial divisions to further stoke these problems that we have in our country.
Absolutely. They came here in 2014 to gather intelligence about if we want to undermine democracy, how do we go about doing it? And they really kind of identified some hotbed issues here, right? We had a lot of racial division, particularly with community relations and policing in certain neighborhoods. Immigration is a hot button topic. Right. And then they also identified so-called purple states to target those. So they knew what they were doing when they invoked Black Lives Matter, when they invoked Blue Lives Matter. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they were trying to sow discord among groups. That was part of the overall operation.
Yeah, I mean, to hear that they were able to successfully organize, marches and demonstrations, it is mind-blowing. And I've always said that, part of this conversation has to be about personal responsibility. You can't legislate that. And I know that, Facebook and all these sort of companies have to do something, but also we need to get a little bit smarter about the things that we read online. So this was quite an interesting revelation about these Russians, right? It happens Friday afternoon, kind of late, and this bomb is dropped. Mueller doesn't do anything by mistake. So let's talk about the timing. Is that significant?
I don't know if the timing necessarily is significant. I think they wanted to get this out quickly so that it didn't leak. Because if you remember, about 30 minutes before this indictment was unsealed, the FBI had just disclosed one of the biggest mistakes in its history. The fact that they missed that tip about the Florida shooter.
Right.
So the fact that this came so quickly, it really, knowing what I know about their strategy, is that they were trying to unseal it and get it out before it leaked.
So
they had
nothing
gone
to
the
do
White
with
House.
the shooting in Florida.
I
just
really
a coincidence.
I think because I've talked to some folks involved in this about the timing a few times, because we thought it was perfectly choreographed with George Papadopoulos, like this other surprise. And usually it's just as soon as it's unsealed, boom, they want to get it out because they don't want it to leak. I mean, Mueller wants to keep control of this to the greatest extent that he can.
So before we let you go, Paula, the president tweeted this weekend. He's being criticized for this tweet, saying that the FBI essentially spent too much time focusing on the Russia investigation. And the Washington Post sort of, made the point that the president seems to think that the FBI is like a 100-person organization where there's like 30 guys working on the Russia collusion and only one guy doing, background checks on individuals. I mean, just knowing the Justice Department the way that you do, just explain to our audience that that may have absolutely nothing to do with it. And to link the deaths of these children to this Russia investigation is probably not good optics for the president.
Well, two things. The first thing is that the folks working on the Russia investigation, they're not the same people fielding these calls that come into West Virginia through the tips line and are then passed along to various field offices. But you cannot escape the fact that this was a massive error. This arguably cost lives. I mean, this is one of the worst mistakes that I've seen in 5 years of covering the Justice Department and the FBI. Even more so than that incident where they allowed Dylan Roof to purchase a gun. In that case, someone misread a map. It was confusion. We're here. They had all the information. Everyone did all the right things, except the FBI didn't do what it needed to do. So the FBI is open to criticism. Whether or not that's an accurate comparison, that resources are being pulled into Russia, that's not fair. But the criticism of the FBI on this specific instance is valid and it is fair. Linking the two, well, you can make up your own mind about that.
Well, as you point out, the individuals that are responding to tips
different people
with crimes are different than the people that are tasked with trying to figure out what happened in our
Mueller
elections.
is not on the if you see something, say something line. He's doing his own thing in Washington. That line is in West Virginia. It's staffed by about 24 people, and they take in thousands of tips every day, only a fraction of which are deemed to be actionable or passed along. But it is clear here that they had all the right information, that person or those people did the right things, and the FBI is investigating how they made this tragic mistake.
Sorry, Paula, before I let you go, you raise an interesting point, and I wonder, and people have suggested this, look, if this kid had been named Muhammad or if he was named Yusuf, that you would have seen some real action, and because he didn't have a name like that, that was sort of a red flag for some individuals. This seemed to not raise those red flags. And I'm not suggesting that the FBI profiles racially, but certainly we've seen many, many instances of people that have Muslim-sounding names pop up in indictments for terrorism, and people have suggested, look, this is also terrorism here.
Well, let's take two different things. First of all, let's talk specifically about Florida, and then let's talk more broadly about how the FBI handles domestic and foreign terror. When it comes to the incidents in Florida, we don't know what happened with these tips. We don't know why they didn't move on it. We don't know if someone missed the piece of paper, if an email got jammed. We don't have enough information to make a conclusion. When it comes, though, to how the FBI handles domestic versus foreign terror threats, of course, a lot of people are very frustrated that there is no definition of domestic terrorism. And the difference is that once you invoke a foreign terrorist organization, the FBI has a lot more power. If you're just saying crazy things in your home about Florida and not invoking that foreign terrorist organization, the FBI doesn't have as much authority. We asked the former FBI director about this repeatedly. Do you have enough resources? And he would always say that he believed that they had sufficient resources allocated to both domestic threats and foreign terror threats, even if sometimes the headlines suggest that they're more focused on anyone supporting ISIS as opposed to people supporting those domestic small t terror groups. The problem is the reason you can't call them terror groups is because you have a right to free speech in this country. And again, if you're not a designated terrorist organization, it's a lot harder for the Justice Department to pursue you in the way that many people would like them to be pursued.
So then a crime like that is mostly in the hands of the state authorities?
It depends what you do. I mean, if you're talking about a lot of the tips that come into the West Virginia office, I was asking, I said, what exactly determines whether or not it's FBI or local law enforcement? And a former official told me anything having to do with national security tends to go to the FBI, but when it comes to school shootings, that tends to be more of a local issue. Same with sexual violence, those kinds of things. So it's certainly not an answer that will satisfy a lot of people, but this is what my reporting has taught me.
All right, well, this is the kind of conversation that perhaps spurs change. Maybe some tweaks in the system need to happen. Paula Reid, so good to have you here at the desk with us.
Thank you. Paula.